I want to say, first of all, how much I appreciate you guys calling and texting and emailing, uh, saying how much our last video testimony meant to you. I appreciate you all very much. I'm glad that in some way the Lord can use uh, how messed up my life was at one point, to help you. And so that's why I'm here this morning. I want to share another little part of uh, my past with you and hope that it'll help you too. In the mid 90s, it was around 96 or so, I had been a Christian basically my whole life. As a teenager, I did some crazy stuff, but always knew who the Lord was, always tried to serve Him, and live the life that my parents had raised me to live. But I woke up one day, as far as I can remember, it was actually on my birthday, and decided I didn't want to be a Christian anymore. Uh, all the things that I had learned and all the things that I had preached and sang about and talked about all those years just didn't seem real anymore. So I went in the complete opposite direction. Um, my wife had left me and taken our 3-year-old baby with her. And so I began to live the party lifestyle of drugs and alcohol and nightclubs and strip clubs and all that. One morning, I had a crew that was working in East Point, doing a big job down there. So I got in the truck and drove down to check on them. And I noticed as I was getting in the truck to leave after checking on the job that I felt a little feverish. My throat was starting to get sore and I was achy around my shoulders and neck. And so I thought, well, I'll take some Xanaxes and I'll stop and get some NyQuil and, drink half a bottle of that and go home and go to bed and sleep it off. I didn't have time to be sick. And so that's what I did. I remember walking in the front door of my house. Uh, like I said, I lived alone. There was nobody there. And I do recall getting home. But after that, it's pretty much a blur. I had a friend of mine, a very dear friend of mine, who cleaned houses for a living, and I was on her schedule. Uh, I was actually not scheduled to be cleaned until the next day. But by what I'm sure was a divine intervention, she decided to show up on this day. She tells the story that she pulled up in the driveway. She saw my vehicle there, which was highly unusual that time of day, since I worked from before daylight till after dark every day. Um, She attempted to use her key to get in the house, and the door was unlocked, which she found odd too. But she says she stepped inside and called out to me several times, and I never answered. And so she figured that I'd, got in the vehicle with another friend of mine or girlfriend or something, and left. So she dismissed all her concerns and went about cleaning the house. Um, Living room, kitchen, the other two smaller bedrooms, the bathrooms. She cleaned all that and saved the master bedroom for last. When she opened the door to the master bedroom, the first thing that she found was me laying on the floor. I didn't have any pulse, wasn't breathing. In her confusion and alarm, like a lot of us, she wasn't thinking very clearly. She called my mother. Uh, and so when my mom arrived, she shook me and screamed at me and all the things trying to get me conscious again. And she says that I did start to come around. So they got me in the bathtub and they cleaned me up, put on some fresh clothes, and then my mother put me in the car and took me to immediate care. By the time I got to immediate care, I was very, very sick. I kept blacking out. My fever was incredibly high. Took me inside to immediate care. They took me straight to the back, and when they took my temperature, they immediately called an ambulance. Told my mother that whatever was wrong with me was far beyond anything they were prepared to deal with. I do remember the ambulance arriving at immediate care. I remember them putting me in the back of the ambulance, but I don't remember the ride to the hospital. They say that I stopped breathing and my heart stopped beating again on the way to the hospital. Once they got me to the emergency room, they spent quite a great deal of time trying to figure out what was wrong with me. They had me packed in ice. My fever at one point was 112. And for those of you who know, that's unheard of. It's certainly unheard of for anybody to live through something like that. They had me packed in ice, had all my clothes cut off of me, and they were just running about trying to figure out what was going on. I remember going in and out of consciousness. I remember excruciating pain in my legs and my hips. I mean, it was terrible. I felt like I was on fire. But my blood pressure and my pulse was so low that they couldn't give me anything for pain. Again, now I know that it was by divine intervention, but an old family doctor and a young man who would later become a good friend of mine and my family doctor just happened to be doing rounds at the hospital, and they decided to walk out to their cars through the emergency room. And so when they walked past my mother, our older family physician saw her and asked her what she was doing there, and she, of course, was terribly distressed and began to express to him what was going on. He came in and took a look at me, pulled the sheet off of me, and when he saw the lesions in my legs, what he called erupting and blood running from those places in my legs, he knew exactly what it was. They quarantined the entire emergency room and anybody that had been around me for the last 2 days. They figured out that I had bacterial meningitis. They say that around 93-94% of the people who get bacterial meningitis don't live through it. A great deal of the people who do live through it generally lose their lower extremities. If I understand the way bacterial meningitis works, and I'm not sure that I do completely, but it attacks the fluid in your spine and works its way up to your brainstem. And anyway, they knew then what was wrong with me. They finally got my temperature down, and by this time, they pretty much knew that I was not going to live. They called my family and all our church friends in, and everybody pretty much gathered around waiting on me to die. And that was the general consensus from all the doctors and nurses that were there. My temperature, although it had come down quite a bit, was still very, very high. And they felt like that they had gotten to me far too late to help me. As the hours progressed, my temperature began to come down even more. All the while, the waiting rooms were full of people who were praying for me. My children had already been in to see me and said their goodbyes, and all the family and family friends had as well. But at some point, they decided that I would probably live. I remember coming to and hearing the doctor tell my mother that my temperature had been so high for so long that she would have to take care of me the rest of my life, that I would be a vegetable, that my brain cells were damaged irreparably, and I'd probably wind up losing my legs and not be able to think cognitively anymore. But again, as the hours progressed and the temperature came down even further, they began to examine my legs and did several tests and determined that I would probably be able to keep my legs with some reasonable amount of use in them. To make a long story short, I got better over a period of time. I wound up in a wheelchair for quite a while. I had to have someone move in the house with me to take care of me. But through all that, I lost a business that was very successful, and that I'd worked very hard for. The depression was terrible. I had really resolved to the fact that I was going to have somebody bathe me and help me the rest of my life. And so I resorted to even more drug use, cocaine, and things of that nature. There was, at the time when I was in the hospital, and I was completely unaware of this at the time, a little baby just down the hall. Precious child, completely innocent, never hurt a soul, never done anything wrong, hadn't lived long enough to do anything wrong, or even know what wrong was. The baby had been attacked by the same disease that I had. I didn't know until a few months ago that the baby even existed, or that we were in the hospital just down the hall from each other at the same time. Nor did I know that for some reason the Lord saw fit to spare me and take that baby. I tell this story because when I found out, at the same time that I found out that this baby was down the hall and that the baby didn't make it, I also found out that I knew, or had come to know recently, the baby's father. And one night in a meeting here at the gate, I had an opportunity to pray with him. And as he came up for prayer, he began to share with me why his life had been so troubled. He couldn't understand why God had taken that child. It basically destroyed his life. It destroyed his family and his future, his hope, and his trust in God. Like most of us probably would be, he was angry with himself and with the hospital, with the doctors, and with God. I got to pray with that man that night. I got to watch him start down the path of restoring his relationship with the Lord. And I got to be his friend. I told you this story because every day, basically, in life, there are things that happen. And as human beings, we wonder why. And I'm not going to tell you that I understand why for sure is God decided to take that precious little baby and spare the life of a drug addict and a liar and a thief. But I do know this, that years later, God was able to use all that, not just to help that baby's father, but to help me and a lot of other people realize that even though we don't always understand what it is that God's doing or why it is that God's doing what he's doing, he does have a plan. And he does make a way to use all things for the good of those who love him and are called according to his purpose. So I just want you to know that whatever it is that you're going through or that you've been through before, I'm sure it's hard. I know I'm not the only one with devastating events in their lives. But you can rest assured that God knows all about it. And if you will, at some point, surrender to the truth that he's in control and that he can use that event and events like it and the repercussions from it to help you and, more importantly, help somebody else, then I think it makes it easier to know and understand that you can trust God. Even though you don't always understand some of the crazy things he does, you can rely on him to make, at some point, all things new again.